The wind howls like tearing metal. Inside a mountain cabin, the fireplace flame flares violently, then gutters. A 5-year-old boy looks up from his toy cars, his eyes fixed on the door. A scratch, faint but desperate. The door bursts open. A vortex of snow and ice explodes into the room, extinguishing the warmth. A shape collapses over the threshold. It is Max, the canine, a mass of ice, blood, and exhaustion. Noah runs forward. "Max, you're back!" But the boy freezes. The floor is wet. The air is frigid, and there is something around the dog's neck. It's a scarf. The tiny red knitted scarf that Noah himself had tied around Max's neck just hours before, to keep him warm. The scarf is now dark, stiff with ice, and stained a deeper crimson, the color of blood. Max has returned, but his handler, Officer Eli, Noah's father, has not. In that instant, a child's gift becomes a bloody message. The boy's hope shatters into raw terror. This is not a homecoming. This is a warning. What happens next will make you believe in absolute loyalty and the quiet miracles that wait in the storm. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. The air in Silver Creek, Colorado, had become a physical weight. High in the Rocky Mountains, the town hunkered down, a final outpost against the granite peaks that tore at an oppressive yellowish-gray sky. A brittle stillness had replaced the usual scouring wind, a pressurized silence that seemed to suck the sound from the valley. This was the ominous prologue to a blizzard, the kind that didn't just blanket the landscape but actively tried to erase it. The mountains, often a majestic backdrop, now felt like the walls of a trap. Inside a small, sturdy bungalow on the edge of the woods, Officer Elias Eli Vance's focus was fractured. At 35, he was a man forged by the same harsh elements as the town, rugged, solid, with a granite jawline and steel-gray eyes that had seen too much. He was a widower, a single father, and a cop, and the effort of balancing those roles was a quiet, daily attrition. He moved with a deliberate economy of motion, his broad shoulders tense as he knelt, attempting to zip the winter jacket of a squirming target. "If you move one more time, Noah, you'll look like a lopsided burrito. Hold still." Noah Vance, 5 years old, was the vibrant, chaotic center of Eli's world. He was all blonde curls and bright, inquisitive blue eyes, a pure, uncut contrast to his father's weathered exterior. "But Max needs his coat too, Daddy," he insisted, wiggling free. The object of his concern, Max, sat by the door. At 6, Max was a creature of disciplined energy, a prime German shepherd whose canine designation was evident in his intelligent, watchful amber eyes. He was Eli's partner, a professional soldier who endured the home front antics of a 5-year-old prince with profound, long-suffering patience. Noah ran to a basket and retrieved a scrap of bright red yarn, a child's clumsy attempt at knitting. "For the cold," Noah declared, wrapping the small, vibrant scarf around the canine's thick neck. Max merely let out a quiet huff, accepting the offering with a sigh, his gaze remaining fixed on Eli. The source of Eli's fractured focus was open on the kitchen counter. His personal laptop displayed shipping manifests he wasn't supposed to have. For weeks, a feeling of professional isolation had been growing. He couldn't shake a hunch about the logging trucks running the quarry pass. They ran too heavy on their supposedly empty returns and far too late at night. It was a gut feeling that had started to harden into a dangerous certainty. His quiet inquiries at the precinct had been met with smiles and quiet stonewalling, all orchestrated by his superior, Captain Marcus Thorne. Thorne, a man in his 50s with the polished ease of a politician and cold, calculating eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses, had built his reputation on taming Silver Creek. Eli, however, recognized the slick veneer of a man who operated in the comfortable shade of his own authority. He suspected the logging trucks were a shell, and he was certain Thorne was the one protecting them. The sharp crackle of his duty radio sliced through the cabin's warmth. The dispatcher's voice was tinny. "All units, be advised, NOAA has upgraded the storm watch to a full blizzard warning. All non-essential travel is prohibited." Moments later, a direct channel buzzed. "Vance, you on?" The voice was Thorne's, gravelly and assured. "Yes, Captain," Eli replied, his back instinctively stiffening. "Before this storm locks us down, I want a final sweep of the high ground. Take your unit up Route 14, Check the old quarry pass. Make sure no idiotic tourists are stuck up there. Eli's stomach tightened. Route 14 was the most remote, treacherous road in the county, a narrow shelf of asphalt clinging to the mountainside. The quarry pass was the exact route he'd been secretly investigating. In the face of a crippling blizzard, the assignment was worse than pointless. It was malicious. It wasn't a patrol, it was a message. Thorne knew he was sniffing around, and was sending him into the teeth of the storm as a warning, or perhaps to get him out of the way. "Copy that, Captain. On my way." There was no refusing. "All right, buddy, time to go. We're dropping you at Sarah's." Noah's face fell, but he understood the routine. Eli scooped him up, a familiar warm weight against his chest, and the three of them, father, son, and K9, piled into the official police SUV. The wind had finally arrived, driving needles of sleet against the windshield. 3 houses down, nestled deeper into the pines, lived Sarah Jenkins, the town's resident enigma. A woman just entering her 40s, Sarah was tall and lean, with a willowy frame that disguised a core of tempered steel. Her ash-blonde hair was always pulled back in a severe practical knot, revealing an angular face and sharp, analytical hazel eyes that missed nothing. She claimed to be a retired data analyst, but Eli, who had run her plates his first week, knew retired was a polite term for burned out. She was ex-FBI, and she had come to Silver Creek seeking an anonymity the mountains readily provided. She recognized in Eli a fellow soul, someone else who watched the world with guarded eyes, and had become his only trusted ally. She opened the door before he knocked, her gaze sweeping the sky, then landing on him. "Thorne?" she asked, her voice low. She didn't need to ask if he was going out. She knew. Eli just nodded, his jaw tight. "Route 14. Her expression tightened, the analytical hazel eyes narrowing. "Right. Get him inside. We're making hot chocolate, Noah, the kind with the big marshmallows." "Wow. Bye, Daddy. Bye, Max." Eli knelt, crushing his son in a hug. "Be good for Sarah. I'll be back before you know it. I promise." He released Noah and stood, his steel-gray eyes meeting Sarah's. His look conveyed a heavy, silent message. Watch him. Her nod was firm, a silent vow. Always. Eli and Max returned to the SUV. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Noah was already at the window, waving, a small, bright figure. Sarah stood behind him, her arms crossed, a tall, unmoving silhouette against the warm light of the cabin. Eli turned his focus to the road. The first real flakes of snow, thick and heavy as wet cement, began to fall. He activated his wipers and steered the SUV toward the mountain pass, toward the very place the danger lay. He was driving, he knew, directly into the shadow of the man he feared, and into the heart of the storm that would swallow them all. The ascent into the mountains was a battle against physics. Eli's police SUV, a heavy-duty vehicle designed for control, felt distressingly light as it climbed Route 14. The blizzard was no longer gathering. It had arrived. It was a suffocating vertical assault of white, reducing the world to the frantic, hypnotic thwack slap of the wipers and the small cone of high beams illuminating the endless curtain of falling snow. The road was a memory, an assumption of asphalt beneath a rapidly deepening layer of ice and powder. Eli drove with his shoulders knotted, knuckles white on the wheel, leaning forward as if he could pierce the chaos through sheer force of will. Beside him, Max was not patient. The canine was restless, whining low in his throat, his amber eyes reflecting the swirling chaos. The small red yarn scarf around his neck was a ridiculous, fragile speck of warmth in the overwhelming cold. "Easy, boy," Eli muttered, more to himself than the dog. "Just a quick sweep of the pass, and we're home." He was lying. This was Thorne's move, a chess piece pushed deep into hostile territory. The quarry entrance was just ahead, a dark gash in the mountainside he'd only ever observed from a distance. As he neared it, he slowed the SUV, his cop's gaze sweeping the entrance despite the whiteout. He saw nothing. No trucks, no tracks, only the storm devouring the landscape. He was about to report an all clear when Max erupted, lunging against his harness with a deep atavistic growl. "What is it?" Eli slammed the brakes, peering into the swirling void, and then the void answered. 2 massive blinding lights punched through the snow, appearing from the quarry road itself. It was a logging truck, the kind he'd been investigating, barreling down the access road far too fast. Its massive steel grille aimed not at the road, but directly at the driver's side door of his SUV. There was no time to swerve, only a split second to register the impossibility of it. The truck shouldn't have been there, before the percussive impact. The world dissolved into a symphony of screaming metal and shattering glass. The SUV weighing 2 tons was swatted from the road like an insect. It went airborne for a moment, a visceral lurch of weightlessness, before it began its violent descent, rolling end over end down the rocky embankment. Eli's head struck the side window, and his world snapped to black. The truck ground to a halt up on the road, its diesel engine a coughing rumble against the wind. 2 doors slammed. 2 figures began to make their way down the slippery incline, their forms dark shapes in the swirling snow. The first was a deputy Eli knew, Alston. Deputy Rick Alston was a man in his early 30s, thin and reedy, with a weak chin and nervous, darting eyes. He was the precinct's coffee fetcher, a man perpetually overwhelmed by the job, always seeking the approval of stronger personalities. Now, his face, illuminated by his flashlight, was a mask of pale terror. The second man was a stranger, and he moved with a terrifying deliberation. He was Gantry. He was massive, built like the logging equipment he probably operated, with a thick, grizzled beard already caked in ice. He wore a heavy canvas work jacket and moved with the slow, indifferent calm of a butcher. They found the wreck, a twisted mass of metal half buried in a snowdrift at the base of a ravine. Eli was slumped sideways, pinned by the crushed dashboard. A dark stain of blood matted his brown hair, contrasting starkly with the snow dusting his shoulders. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. A low growl met them. Max had been thrown partially clear through the shattered rear window. The dog was on his feet, though his left hind leg buckled and blood dripped from a deep gash on his shoulder. The red scarf was still there, a defiant slash of color. Max stood over Eli's exposed body, teeth bared, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. "Damn dog," Alston stammered, his hand hovering near his holstered sidearm. Gantry merely looked at the animal with cold disinterest. "He's still alive," Alston said, his voice shaking, pointing his light at Eli's chest, which barely rose. We gotta help him," Gantry backhanded him, the heavy glove sending Alston stumbling into the drift. "We help no one. That's the point." Gantry pulled a large, dark revolver from his coat. Thorne said to handle it. "He said no bullets," Alston shrieked, scrambling back, his voice thin in the wind. "He said make it look like the storm, an accident. No bullets, Gantry, that was the order." Gantry stared at the panicked deputy, then at Eli, then at the sky. The snow was falling faster, thicker. He lowered the gun, a slow, cruel smile splitting his icy beard. "You're right, kid. The order was no bullets. Why waste one?" He looked back at Eli's broken form. "He'll be frozen solid in an hour. The storm gets the credit." Alston whimpered, looking away. "Let's go. Thorne wants the truck back at the mill before the pass is fully closed." Gantry gave the growling dog one last, dismissive look, then turned and began the heavy climb back to the road. Alston, casting one last, terrified glance at Eli, scrambled after him. Their taillights were swallowed by the blizzard in seconds. Silence returned, heavier this time, broken only by the wind and Max's pained whine. The cold was beginning its work, a numbing, insidious lethargy creeping into Eli's limbs. But the crash, or perhaps the cold, shocked him back to a sliver of consciousness. His vision was a blurry tunnel. He tasted blood. He couldn't move. He saw only 2 things: the red and blue flash of his own hazard lights reflecting off the snow, and the dark, loyal shape of his partner standing guard. He tried to speak, a broken sound dying in his throat. Max limped closer, pushing his cold nose against Eli's cheek, whining. Eli's fading gaze fixed on the dog. He couldn't feel his hands, but he saw the small red scrap of yarn at Max's neck. Noah. The name was a silent scream in his mind. He couldn't form the command, but his eyes, filled with a desperate, agonizing plea, locked with Max's. "Go. Find Noah. Get Sarah." Max, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand the final, silent order, let out one short, sharp bark. The sound was ripped away by the wind. The dog licked Eli's face one last time, a gesture of profound, heartbreaking loyalty. Then the canine's training took over. His duty to protect Eli was futile. His new mission was clear. Max turned away from his fallen partner. He looked up the sheer, icy embankment toward the road he could no longer see. His shoulder screamed in pain, his leg dragged, but he took the first agonizing step, then another, hauling himself up the ravine. He began the impossible journey back, a wounded lone sentinel fighting the storm, carrying the hope of his master on his baon and a small red piece of yarn around his neck. The blizzard had consumed the world. Inside Sarah Jenkins's cabin, the only sounds were the crackle of the fireplace and the low pressurized howl of the wind as it searched for any weakness in the structure. The warmth was a small, defiant bubble of civilization against the raw, primordial chaos outside. Sarah, her tall, lean frame folded into an armchair, was not relaxed. Her analytical hazel eyes, which missed nothing, were fixed on the window, though it was now just a black pane plastered with horizontal snow. She was tracking the storm on her tablet, her face illuminated by the angry reds and yellows of the Doppler radar. The system was stalling over Silver Creek, a massive swirling engine of ice and air. She had seen blizzards, but this was a siege. "Is Daddy catching the bad guys in the snow?" Noah's small voice piped up from the rug. He had a halo of blonde curls and was meticulously arranging his toy police cars near the hearth, creating his own small, orderly world. He held a mug of hot chocolate, a sticky ring of marshmallow cream around his lips. "Something like that, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice intentionally calm. She'd spent her former career projecting unflappable control in interrogation rooms. Managing the anxiety of a 5-year-old was a similar, if gentler, application of the same skill. "Your dad and Max are a team. They know how to handle the snow. They're probably just helping someone who got stuck." Noah seemed to accept this, turning back to his cars. "Max is brave," he stated, as if it were a law of physics. "Yes, he is," Sarah agreed, her gaze drifting back to the terrifying radar map. "Be safe, Eli." Miles away, bravery had nothing to do with it. Survival was instinct, a raw, burning algorithm. Max was no longer a canine partner. He was a wounded animal driven by a singular purpose. The distance from the ravine to Sarah's cabin was perhaps 3 miles, a short trot in good weather. In the blizzard, it was an Arctic expedition. The snow was chest-deep in the drifts, a thick, granular quicksand that stole his energy with every step. His left hind leg was a dead weight, dragging uselessly behind him, leaving a faint, bloody smear that the storm erased almost instantly. The gash on his shoulder, exposed to the sub-zero wind, had frozen into a stiff, agonizing wound. But the pain was secondary. His primary sense, his nose, was filled with one scent, faint and elusive on the wind, the wood smoke from Sarah's chimney. He lowered his head, a dark shape plowing through the white void, the small, ice-caked red scarf on his neck, the only color in a world of gray and black. He was navigating by memory, by the ghost of a scent, by the desperate, silent command of the man he'd left dying in the snow. Back in the cabin, the clock ticked past midnight. The storm had reached a new crescendo, a shrieking metallic whine that made the reinforced windows shudder. Noah had finally succumbed to the warmth and the sugar, falling, asleep on the thick bearskin rug, his toy car still clutched in his hand. Sarah stood, stretching her long limbs, her joints stiff from the tension. She was about to bank the fire for the night when she froze. She tilted her head, her ash-blonde hair catching the firelight. It wasn't the wind. It was something else. A faint, rhythmic scrape. Scrape, scrape, pause. Her training, long dormant, snapped into place. Her entire posture changed. The relaxed babysitter vanished, replaced by the ex-FBI agent. Her heart hammered, but her movements were fluid. That wasn't a branch. A branch was random. This was methodical. Scrape, scrape. It was low, at the base of the door, too low for a man. She moved silently to the door, ignoring the peephole. It would be useless, painted over with ice. She picked up the heavy cast-iron fireplace poker, gripping its weight in her right hand. She listened again. A desperate, wet scratching, followed by a low, agonizing whine that was almost stolen by the wind. A dog. She exhaled, her tension shifting from fear of an intruder to a new, cold dread. Eli. She flipped the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door inward. The storm exploded into the room, a vortex of snow and ice extinguishing a candle on the table. At first, she saw nothing, just the howling white void. Then she looked down. It was not a dog. It was a creature of ice and blood, a snow-caked effigy that collapsed over the threshold and onto the entryway floor. It was Max. He was covered in frozen gore, his fur matted with ice crystals and dark frozen blood. His shoulder was a raw, open wound. He tried to lift his head, his amber eyes dim with exhaustion, and let out a broken whine. He was shivering so violently the floorboards seemed to vibrate. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, dropping the poker. The sudden blast of cold and the sound of the door slamming shut woke Noah instantly. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and saw the shape on the floor. "Max, you're back!" he cried joyfully, scrambling to his feet. But as he got closer, his joy turned to confused terror. He stopped, his bare feet cold on the wood floor, his blue eyes wide. He saw the blood. He saw the ice. He saw the small red scarf she'd helped him tie earlier, now stiff and dark, matted with his partner's frozen blood. "Max?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Max, you're hurt. Where's Daddy?" That was the question. Sarah stood frozen for 1 second, her mind a high-speed processor, assembling the facts. Max is here. Eli is not. Max is critically injured, not by an animal, but by something violent and sudden. The location, Route 14, the exact place Thorne had sent Eli into the teeth of the storm. It wasn't a hunch, it was a conclusion. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a stranded motorist. This was an ambush. Eli was out there, in that, and Max had crawled through hell to tell her. She slammed the door, the heavy thud sealing them inside. She turned to Noah, whose face was crumpling into tears. "It's okay, honey," she said, her voice a practiced steady lie, a shield against the horror. "Max must have found a bear. We have to help him." She grabbed her emergency medical kit, her hands finally shaking. The cozy cabin had become a field hospital. The babysitting job had just become a recovery operation. The lie hung in the air, a fragile, necessary shield against the raw terror in Noah's eyes. "Where's Daddy?" The question, so small and broken, demanded an answer Sarah Jenkins did not have. Her mind, a high-speed processor trained by years of federal service, was assembling the facts. Eli, Route 14, Thorne's suspicious order, the blizzard, and now this. His canine, returned without him, half dead and bearing the marks of violence, not nature. This was no bear. This was an ambush. But she couldn't say that. She had to manage the scene. Her first duty was to the living. "Noah, listen to me," she said, her voice dropping into a register of absolute calm authority that commanded attention. The ex-agent surfaced, pushing the terrified babysitter aside. "Max is very cold and he's hurt. I need you to be my big helper right now. I can't do this without you." Noah's lip trembled, but he nodded, desperate for a job. "Go to the hall closet, get the big blue emergency kit, then go to the bathroom and get every single towel you can find. All of them. And the big wool blanket from my bed. Can you do that for me, quick as you can?" Noah, given a mission, scrambled to his feet and ran. The moment he was out of the room, Sarah's focus narrowed, her hazel eyes becoming cold and analytical. She dropped to her knees beside the dying dog. The smell of wet fur, ozone, and the sharp, coppery tang of blood filled her senses. Max's breathing was a shallow, rattling gasp. Hypothermia was the immediate killer. The blood loss was the second. Noah returned, dragging a pile of towels. "Good job, helper. Now, spread them out here, by the fire." As he worked, Sarah took the blue kit. This was no civilian first aid box. It was a trauma kit. She grabbed shears and began to cut away the ice-caked, bloody fur around the shoulder wound. "You're okay, Max," she murmured, her hands swift and sure. The wound was deep, a vicious tear, but it wasn't a gunshot. It was a metal-on-flesh wound, a shearing wound, the wreck. She realized he had been thrown from the vehicle. She cleaned it with antiseptic, her movements economical and precise. Max whined, a high, thin sound, but he didn't snap. He seemed to understand. "See, Noah," she said, forcing the calm lie again, maintaining the narrative for the child. "The bear's claws were sharp, but Max is tougher." She packed the wound and began to bandage it tightly. "Now, the cold. We have to beat the cold." She and Noah piled the dry towels and the heavy wool blanket over the dog, creating a cocoon. "Okay, Noah, here is your most important job," she said, guiding him to sit on the floor. "Sit right here and pet his head, just his head, gently. Talk to him. Tell him he's a good boy. He needs to hear your voice to stay brave." Noah nodded, his smally hand resting on Max's broad skull, and he began to whisper, "You're a good boy, Max. You're the best boy." With Noah occupied, Sarah's hands continued their work, checking for other injuries, feeling for broken ribs, her fingers probing the dog's powerful frame. Her hand brushed against the nylon collar, still buckled beneath the sodden, frozen red scarf. She had to check his tags, though she knew what they said. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp of the small, pathetic scarf. She unhooked it, her throat tightening, as she held the small scrap of yarn. Noah's love, returned in blood. She set it on the hearth like a holy relic. Then she felt the tags. Max, Silver Creek PD. Standard, but her fingers, trained to find anomalies, felt something else. Tucked behind the primary tag, half hidden by the collar's loop, was a small, worn piece of metal. It wasn't a tag. It was a sigil. Her blood ran cold. She pulled the collar sideways to the firelight. It was a small, stamped crest, a wolf's head in profile, framed by a stylized shield. Her breath caught in her chest. It couldn't be. There was no reason for that sigil to be here, in this town, on this dog. She had designed it herself. It was the unofficial insignia for the FBI's elite canine deep ops unit in Denver, her unit. The warm, firelit cabin dissolved, and she was back in the cold, sterile briefing rooms of the Denver field office. 3 years prior, it was the case that broke her, a high-level trafficking ring using chemical precursors. They had one asset, a handler with a brilliant canine trained to sniff a specific odorless compound. The dog's name was Zeus. The case was tight, but every time they moved, the ring was one step ahead. There was a leak, and the supervisor overseeing the joint task force, the man who always seemed to have a plausible reason for their failures, the charismatic, untouchable man from an outside agency, was Marcus Thorne. The case imploded when her handler died in a fiery, single-car accident. The dog, Zeus, vanished from the scene. The official report said he had fled the burning car and likely died in the wilderness. The case was closed. Sarah's career was ruined. She'd pushed too hard, accused the wrong people without proof, and was quietly forced into early retirement. She had fled to Silver Creek to be invisible. Scrape, scrape. The sound of Max's claw twitching on the wood floor brought her back. She stared at the wolf's head sigil. It was Zeus. She was looking at Zeus. Thorne hadn't just escaped, he had cleaned house. He'd killed her handler and stolen the single most valuable piece of evidence against him, the dog. He'd brought the canine here, to this backwater town, given him a new name, and hidden him in plain sight, assigned to a simple, honest cop who would never know his partner was a living, breathing, loose end. And now, Eli had gotten too close. He'd started sniffing around the quarry, just like her handler had sniffed around those chemical plants in Denver. And Thorne had used the same playbook, a staged accident in bad weather. This wasn't fate. This was a convergence. The quiet life she had tried to build was a fiction. The evil she had run from had been living 3 doors down all along. Max, Zeus, hadn't just crawled here for help. He had crawled here to her. He had brought the case back to the only other person alive who knew the truth. Max's eyes were open, just slits, but he was watching her. She placed her hand on his head, next to Noah's. "You did your part, Zeus," she whispered, so low only the dog could hear. His tail gave a single, faint thump on the floor. He knew, he remembered. The terror in her chest solidified into something cold, hard, and familiar. It was rage. It was resolve. Noah had finally fallen asleep, his small body curled against the dog's warm blanket-covered back, his duty done. Sarah gently moved him to the sofa. She looked from the sleeping boy to the wounded dog, then to the window, where the storm shrieked like a banshee. She couldn't call the Silver Creek police. Thorne was the police. She couldn't wait for the storm to pass. Eli was dying in the storm. She stood up, the tall, willowy woman gone, replaced by the agent. She walked to her bedroom and knelt beside her bed. Her fingers found the latches on the flat, black, dust-covered footlocker she hadn't opened in 3 years, the one containing the gear she thought she'd never need again. She clicked them open. The click of the footlocker's latches was unnervingly loud in the quiet, firelit cabin. It was a sound from another life, a sound that officially ended her retirement. The air that rose from the open trunk was not the smell of mothballs or memories. It was the sharp, metallic tang of CLP gun oil, the dry scent of nylon webbing, and the faint, dusty smell of vacuum-sealed preparedness. Sarah Jenkins, the quiet, analytical civilian, evaporated. In her place stood the operator she had spent a decade trying to bury. Her movements, which had been tense and shaky, became fluid, economical, and devoid of panic. This was no longer a crisis. It was a problem set. Her first priority was Noah. He was still asleep on the sofa, his small face peaceful, oblivious to the fact that his world had shattered. He is safe for now. Thorn wouldn't come here first. He would wait for confirmation of Eli's death, believing the storm would provide the perfect cover. Her second priority was Eli. He was the objective. Wounded, freezing, pinned. He had hours, perhaps minutes. Her third priority was the asset at her feet. Max, Zeus, was her only compass. "Okay," she whispered, not to the dog or the boy, but to herself. The mission was unauthorized, insane, and necessary. She began to gear up, a methodical, grim ritual. She stripped off the comfortable wool sweater and jeans and pulled on thermal, moisture-wicking base layers from the trunk. Over them, a thin, flexible level 3 soft armor vest. It wouldn't stop a rifle round, but it would stop a pistol, and it fit under her winter gear. She strapped a nylon duty belt around her waist, the plastic buckle clicking shut. She checked her weapon, a Sig Sauer P29R, her old FBI-issue sidearm. She ejected the magazine, checked the spring, slapped it back into the grip, and racked the slide, chambering around. The snick slide was the second punctuation mark, confirming the end of her piece. She sheathed the pistol in a Kydex holster on her hip. Next, communications. She pulled out a brick-like Iridium satellite phone. Local cell towers were unreliable in a storm, and, more importantly, they were traceable. Thorn controlled the local network. This sat phone was her only clean line. She powered it on, waiting for the reassuring beep of a satellite link. She programmed a single number into its speed dial, the direct line of her former section chief in Denver, the one man she still trusted. She grabbed a small waterproof pouch and packed a full trauma kit, quick clot gauze, tourniquets, chest seals, and 2 auto-injectors of epinephrine. She stuffed high-energy protein bars into her pockets. She strapped a heavy, ankle-mounted crowbar knife to her boot. Finally, she pulled a Gore-Tex blizzard-proof parka, stark white for camouflage, from the locker, slinging it over the back of the chair. She was ready. She looked at Max. The dog's eyes were open. He had been watching her. Every piece of gear she strapped on, his gaze, had followed, the amber eyes sharp and intelligent. He knew the ritual. "You stay, Zeus," she commanded, her voice firm. "Watch the boy. Walk!" It was the German command from his training days. Max whined, a low, agonizing sound. He tried to obey. He lowered his head, but his body was trembling with a desperate, conflicting energy. Sarah turned her back on him, zipped up her boots, and grabbed the sat phone. She had to go. She couldn't risk the dog slowing her down. He was a liability. No. The sound was a half bark, half groan. She turned. Max was on his feet. He shouldn't have been. His entire body was shaking with the effort. His wounded back leg held completely off the ground. Blood, fresh and bright, had begun to seep through the white bandage on his shoulder. He was standing on 3 legs, swaying from pain and exhaustion. But he was standing. He looked at her, his teeth bared, not in aggression, but in a defiant plea. He took one agonizing, hopping step toward the door. He was no longer Max, the patient pet. He was Zeus, canine unit, and his handler was in the field. His place was at her side. A terrible realization struck Sarah. She was a trained agent, but she was not a wilderness tracker. In this blizzard, in the dark, she would be walking blind. She'd never find the ravine. She'd walk in circles until she froze to death, and Eli would die alone. The dog was a liability. He was also her only chance. "Damn it," she breathed. It was a terrible, desperate gamble. Okay, you magnificent, stubborn bastard. You lead, but if you fall, I'm not carrying you." The dog let out a short, sharp bark, acknowledging the new terms. She quickly checked his bandage, reinforcing it with waterproof tape from her kit. She found a small plastic water bottle in the kitchen, filled it, and let the dog drink half, saving the rest. Her final act was for Noah. She couldn't write a note. Thorn's men might find it. Instead, she took the sat phone and laid it on the coffee table, next to Noah's sleeping head. She taped a small piece of paper to it with one word, "Daddy." She then took Noah's small hand in hers and pressed his index finger onto the one key. She did it 3 times, hoping the muscle memory, even in his sleep, might register. If he woke, if he was scared, he would see the phone, see the note, and press the one button he'd ever need to. It was a desperate, flimsy hope, but it was all she had. She stood. She pulled on the white parka and zipped it up, the gear heavy and comforting beneath it. She slung a high-lumen tactical flashlight to her belt. She looked at the sleeping boy, a wave of cold fear washing over her. She was leaving him alone. "I'll be back for you, Noah," she whispered, a promise to the universe. She turned to the door, her face hardening. Max was already there, leaning against the frame, his breath fogging, his eyes fixed on the outside. Sarah chambered her own breath, pulled her hood up, and grabbed the door handle. She pulled it open. The storm did not enter. It attacked. The wind hit them like a physical wall, a solid mass of ice and noise that stole their breath and tried to force them back. The peaceful firelit cabin was gone, replaced by a screaming white void. Sarah lowered her goggles, leaned into the wind, and took the first step out onto the porch. Beside her, the wounded dog followed, lowering his head and disappearing into the chaos, a dark shadow guided by loyalty on an impossible mission. The first sensation was not pain, but the aggressive, abrasive scrape of a rough wool blanket against his chin. The second was the smell: dust, stale wood smoke, and the sharp metallic tang of drying blood. Elias Vance's eyes snapped open, but his vision was a blurry, unfocused smear. He tried to move his head, and a white-hot spear of agony shot from the base of his skull down his spine, forcing a groan from his chapped lips. He was not in his SUV, he was not in the snow. He was inside, on a cot, in a room lit by the low, flickering orange glow of a kerosene lamp. "Don't move, Eli. You have a severe concussion and at least 2 broken ribs, and I think your left clavicle is fractured." The voice was calm, familiar, and absolutely in charge. Sarah Jenkins. She materialized from the shadows, her tall, lean frame looking spectral in the dim light. Her face, usually so analytical and controlled, was etched with a profound exhaustion. She was wearing tactical gear he had never seen before, her ash-blonde hair matted with sweat and melted snow. "Sarah, where—" "An old hunter's blind, about a mile north of the ravine," she said, wringing out a cloth in a bowl of dark, bloody water. "We can't stay here long, but it's shielded from the wind." "We?" Eli's blurry gaze shifted. In the corner, a dark shape lifted its head. "Max," he whispered. The canine was lying on a pile of moldy tarps, his own shoulder wrapped in a stained, makeshift bandage. The dog's tail gave a single, weak thump. Eli tried to piece together the nightmare: the truck, the impact, the cold, the sight of Gantry's icy beard. He came for you," Eli choked out, his throat raw. "He did," Sarah said, her voice tight with an emotion he couldn't place. "He crawled 3 miles through that hell, Eli. He's Zeus." Eli frowned, his concussed mind struggling with the name. "Zeus?" "Later," she said, dismissing the question. "The men, the truck, you saw them?" "Alston," Eli whispered, the name tasting like ash. "And Gantry, from the logging crew. They left me." "I know," Sarah said, her voice now dangerously quiet. "Thorne's orders, to make it look like the storm." The full, horrifying reality of it crashed into him, more painful than his injuries. It wasn't just suspicion, it was a fact. His captain, his superior officer, had tried to murder him. "Noah!" he gasped, panic seizing him. "Where is Noah?" "He's at my cabin. He's alone." The word struck Eli like a physical blow. "What?" "Sarah, no, you have to go back." He tried to sit up, but the world spun, and he collapsed back, gasping as his broken ribs screamed. "I couldn't carry you and bring him, Eli," she snapped, the agent's frustration showing. "My truck is at the cabin. The roads are impassable. We're on foot. He's the bait." "Bait? What are you talking about?" Sarah held up the small, brick-like satellite phone. "Thorne doesn't know you're alive yet, but Gantry will report the wreck is empty. When he does, Thorne will have one priority: cleaning up loose ends. And Noah is the biggest one." Eli stared at her, the implication dawning. You left him there on purpose?" "I left him a lifeline," she countered, her hazel eyes hard. "I left him this, and I taught him one button to push. It calls me. It's a trap, Eli. Thorne will send his men, and Noah will call. When he does, we'll know they've made their move. It's the only way to—" The sat phone in her hand, the one she'd been holding, suddenly vibrated, a harsh, buzzing sound in the tiny cabin. It wasn't a call, it was an alert, a text-based APB feed she was still, apparently, looped into from her FBI days. Her face went pale as she read the screen. "What?" Eli demanded. She turned the screen to him. "He's already made his move. He's not waiting." The alert was concise. APB, Silver Creek County, Officer Elias Vance, wounded, armed, and dangerous. Fled scene of accident, suspected of psychotic break. Search of residence indicates he has abducted his 5-year-old son, Noah Vance. All units exercise extreme caution. Eli's blood ran colder than the snow. He's framing me for kidnapping my own son. It's worse than that, Sarah said, her mind already 3 steps ahead. He's not just framing you, he's given his deputies a license to kill you on sight, armed and dangerous. Psychotic break. He's cleaning house, and he's already on his way to my cabin. Not to find Noah, Eli whispered, the horror complete. To take him, to make the story fit. The unstable father. The front door of Sarah's cabin splintered open, not from a knock, but from the heavy tactical boot of gantry. He entered the warm, fire-lit room, his massive frame filling the doorway, snow and cold air billowing in behind him. He was no longer the indifferent butcher. He was an armed man on a mission, his revolver drawn. "Check the bedrooms," he grunted. Deputy Rick Alston, his reedy frame trembling, stumbled in behind him. Alston looked even more terrified than he had at the ravine. He was a cop, but this, breaking into a civilian's home, hunting a child, this was not what he'd signed on for. "Noah?" Alston called out, his voice cracking, trying to sound reassuring. "Noah, it's Officer Alston. We're here to help you, buddy. Your dad, he's hurt." There was no answer. The cabin was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. The empty child-sized mug of hot chocolate sat on the hearth, a ring of marshmallow dried to its rim. "Kid's not here," Gantry said, his cold eyes sweeping the small space. "He was," Alston said, pointing to the sofa, where a small indentation remained in a cushion. "He was right here. Sarah, too." Gantry's eyes narrowed. He saw the open trauma kit on the floor. He saw the pile of bloody towels, and he saw the open, empty footlocker in the bedroom. She was here, and she geared up. Thorne was right. The FBI bitch is involved. He stomped back to the living room. Find the kid. He couldn't have gone far in this. Check the closets, under the beds. But Noah was not in the closet, and he was not under the bed. He had been asleep on the sofa when the first loud bang of a boot on the porch woke him. He sat up, his heart rabbit-fast. He saw the flashlight beams cutting through the windows. He heard a gruff, angry voice he didn't know. He was terrified. But his father was a cop, and his father had prepared him, not for this, but for the idea of this. They had a special game, the shadow game. If a stranger ever tries to get you, Noah, you don't hide where they expect. You don't hide in the house. You become a shadow. You go out the back, you get to the woods, and you follow the big pine trail. You run, and you don't stop. It was a game Eli had invented, fueled by a widower's paranoia, but he had drilled it, just in case. Noah saw the flashlight beam land on the satellite phone. He saw the note. Daddy. He instinctively reached for it, his fingers brushing the 1 key, but then the door crashed open. Noah didn't scream. He did exactly what his father had taught him. He slid off the couch, silent as a mouse. He didn't run to his room. He ran to the back door, to the small, frozen doggy door built for Max. He crawled through it, landing in the deep, soft snowdrift behind the cabin. He was in his pajamas. He was shoeless, but he was a shadow. He stood up, the wind and snow hitting his face, a pain so cold it was like fire. He looked back at the house, saw the dark shapes of the men moving inside. Then he turned and ran, his small bare feet sinking deep, heading for the woods, just like his father had told him. The APB alert on the satellite phone's screen was more than a lie. It was a death sentence, elegantly drafted by a killer in a captain's uniform. Eli Vance stared at the words, armed and dangerous, psychotic break, abducted his 5-year-old son. The blood in his veins, which had been sluggish with cold and shock, turned to ice. He's hunting him, Eli whispered, the words gravelly, thick with horror. He's not just framing me. He's at the cabin. He's hunting Noah. He tried to sit up, a purely instinctual, paternal movement, but the world dissolved into a blinding white-hot agony. The fractured ends of his ribs ground together, and the room spun violently. He collapsed back onto the cot, a strangled gasp tearing from his throat, his hand clutching his side. "Eli, stop!" Sarah commanded, pushing him back down, her hand firm on his uninjured shoulder. "You're no good to him dead. You can't even stand. You'll hemorrhage internally before you make it 20 yards. He's in his pajamas, Eli choked out, the reality of it suffocating him. God, Sarah, he's in his pajamas. In this. He won't last an hour. He'll just lie down. He'll fall asleep. The image of his small, blonde-haired boy, barefoot in the snow, broke through the fog of his concussion, a terror far colder than the storm. He was failing him. At that moment, Max, who had been lying on the tarp, his breathing shallow, lifted his head. The dog's wounded body was rigid. He let out a low, guttural growl, not of aggression, but of deep, visceral anxiety. He could smell it, the cortisol, the sheer primal terror pouring off Eli. He pushed himself up, swaying on 3 legs, his amber eyes locked on his handler. "They're at the cabin," Sarah said, her voice a low, tactical monotone, her mind piecing the chessboard together. "Gantry and Alston. They just found the house empty. They found the open footlocker. They know I'm with you, and they know the boy is gone." Eli's eyes, wild with pain, snapped to hers. "The shadow game. I taught him a game. Don't hide where they expect. Run for the woods. Follow the Big Pine Trail. Oh, God." The realization hit him. They'll find his tracks. He's barefoot, Sarah. He's leaving a trail. The flashlight beam from Gantry's heavy maglite cut through the swirling snow, illuminating the small, perfect depressions in the snowdrift behind Sarah's cabin. They were unmistakably the footprints of a small, barefooted child. "Damn it," Gantry spat, the word ripped away by the wind. "The little rat went out the doggy door." Deputy Alston, his thin face pale and blotchy, stared at the tracks as if they were a death warrant. "Gantry, we can't. He's a kid. He's barefoot. We gotta call it in. Get search and rescue. He'll die out there." Gantry turned his massive bearded head slowly, his cold eyes flat and devoid of emotion. "Search and rescue? We are search and rescue, kid. Thorne wants the loose end. The kid is the loose end. He just made it easier, taking himself out of the house. No witnesses." He aimed his flashlight beam toward the tree line. The footprints were already filling with snow, but they were visible, leading directly into the dark, howling maw of the forest. "He's heading for the trees," Gantry grunted. "Move." Noah Vance couldn't feel his feet. They had stopped burning 10 minutes ago, and were now just numb, clumsy blocks of wood at the end of his legs. He was crying, but the tears froze instantly on his cheeks, stinging his skin. He was in his thin, rocket ship pajamas. The shadow game was the only thing in his mind, his father's voice, calm and strong, repeating the rules. Don't hide where they expect. Become a shadow. Follow the Big Pine Trail. He knew the trail. He and Daddy and Max walked it in the summer. He just had to get to the Big Pine, the giant ancient tree that stood on the ridge. He stumbled, falling face first into a drift. The snow was soft, but the impact was jarring. It was so warm, just for a second. He wanted to sleep. He wanted his dad. "Get up, Shadow." He pushed himself up, his small hands raw, and staggered on. Then he heard it, carried on the wind. "Noah, we're here to help you, son. It's Officer Alston." He froze, his heart hammering. He recognized the voice, but his father's other rule, the most important one, echoed in his head. The shadows don't talk back, not to anyone. He scrambled, diving behind a thick fallen log, curling his small body into a ball. He peeked over the top. 2 flashlight beams were cutting through the trees, much closer now. They were following him. They were hunting him. In the hunter's blind, the tension was a physical thing. "They're hunting him," Eli repeated, his voice flat, broken. Max was at the door, pawing at the wood, whining, a high, piercing sound of pure distress. He knew. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew his pack was in mortal danger. Eli looked at Sarah, his eyes hollow. "The Big Pine. It's about a mile from your house, northeast, towards the ridge." Sarah's sharp, hazel eyes snapped to his. "Where is that, relative to us, to this blind?" Eli closed his eyes, his concussed mind fighting to render a map. "West, maybe 2 miles, across the frozen creek. They'll get to him first." Sarah made the decision. The gamble she had taken on the dog was not over. It had just escalated. "You can't go," she said, her voice firm. "But he can." She looked at Max. "He's wounded, Sarah," Eli pleaded. "He's bleeding again. You'll be sending him out there to die. He'll die anyway if we stay here and do nothing, she retorted, her voice hard as the steel of her sidearm. That dog, that's not just a dog, Eli, that's Zeus. He was the best tracker in the Bureau. He's an operator, and he's been waiting for a mission. She turned, her entire focus narrowing on the three-legged animal. Zeus! The canine's head snapped to her, his whining instantly cut off. The loyal pet vanished, replaced by the alert, focused soldier. Sarah moved to the pile of gear she had dropped by the door. She picked up the small, sodden, ice-caked piece of red yarn, Noah's scarf. She walked back to the dog and knelt, holding it out, letting the other scents, her own, Eli's, the cabin's, fall away, leaving only the one that mattered. She held it to the dog's cold, wet nose. Suchen, she commanded, the German word for seek, a word from his past, a word that meant work. Find Noah. Max inhaled the scent, his nostrils flaring. He knew it. It was the small one, the boy. He looked at Sarah, his old handler. He looked at Eli, his new handler, prone and broken on the cot. He understood. The pack was scattered, and the smallest member was lost. He let out a single, sharp, confident bark. Eli, his face a mask of agony and desperate hope, pushed himself up on one elbow. Find him, Max, he whispered, his voice cracking. Find my boy. Find him. Sarah opened the door of the hunter's blind. The storm, in its full shrieking fury, assaulted the tiny structure. Max did not hesitate. He didn't look back. He launched himself from the doorway, landing on his three good legs, and plunged back into the white, a wounded, determined shadow, racing the hunters, racing the cold, racing death. The door slammed shut, leaving Eli and Sarah alone in the sudden, terrible silence, having just sent their last wounded hope back into the heart of the storm. The world for Noah Vance had shrunk to the next step. The shadow game was no longer a game. It was a torture. His bare feet were no longer his own, just 2 blocks of agonizing frozen wood that he dragged through the snow. Don't hide where they expect. Follow the big pine trail. Become a shadow. His father's voice was the only thing holding him together, a fading mantra against the wind's deafening shriek. He couldn't feel his hands. He couldn't feel his face. He was crying, but the tears were invisible, frozen particles swept away by the blizzard. He was so sleepy. The snow looked soft, like his bed. He just wanted to lie down. Then, through the swirling white, a shape loomed, larger than all the others, a massive, ancient darkness against the gray. The big pine. He'd made it. He'd won the game. He stumbled toward the base where a hollow, carved out by lightning centuries ago, offered a small, dark refuge. He crawled inside, pulling his knees to his chest, and as the numbing warmth of advanced hypothermia began its deceptive, deadly embrace, his world finally went dark. Gantry's flashlight beam, a harsh, probing scalpel, cut through the snow. He's close, he grunted, his voice a low rumble. Tracks end here. He was an apex predator, and he was annoyed. Deputy Alston, his reedy frame shaking so violently it wasn't just from the cold, looked at the massive tree, his face a mask of green, sickly terror. Gantry, look at this. He stopped, Alston stammered, his flashlight beam illuminating the last set of small, barefooted tracks, half filled with powder. He's in the tree. Gantry, for God's sake, we call it in. We call search and rescue. We say we found him. That's the end of it. Gantry turned, his massive bearded head moving with a slow, deliberate menace. You still don't get it, do you, kid? He said, his voice almost paternal. Thorne ain't paying us to find him. He's paying us to lose him. An officer, crazed with grief, kidnaps his own son, and they both tragically vanish in the blizzard. It's a sad story. It's a clean story. Gantry raised his heavy maglite and aimed it into the hollow. The beam landed on the small, huddled shape of Noah, his pale face stained with frozen tears, barely visible. End of the line, Shadow, Gantry whispered. No! Alston shrieked, the sound thin and pathetic. He drew his service pistol, his hand shaking uncontrollably. I'm a cop, Gantry. I won't. I'm taking the kid and I'm calling it in. Gantry looked at the trembling gun, then at Alston's terrified eyes, and he sighed. You're right, kid. You are a cop. He moved, a sudden blindingly fast lunge. He didn't go for Alston's gun. He simply slammed his massive gloved fist into Alston's face. The deputy crumpled, his gun flying into a snowdrift, his nose shattering on impact. Gantry stood over him, then turned back to the hollow. "Too many witnesses," he grumbled. He unholstered his own revolver, the dark metal seeming to drink the light, and aimed it not at Alston, but at the small, unconscious child in the tree. In the hunter's blind, Eli was rocking, his face buried in his hands. "He's gone, Sarah. I sent him to his death. It was a stupid game. He's gone." Sarah Jenkins was not listening to him. She was on the Iridium satellite phone, her back rigid, her voice a low, cold monotone that cut through the static. "That's correct, Chief Harris. I am declaring a Kilo 19 officer in peril. The primary target is Captain Marcus Thorne, Silver Creek PD. He has attempted the murder of Officer Elias Vance and has 2 proxies, Gantry and Alston, currently in the field. They are, as we speak, hunting Officer Vance's 5-year-old son." The voice on the other end, gravelly and shocked, was that of a man she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "Jesus, Jenkins, you always did know how to go quiet. I'm looking at your file. You're retired." "I'm reactivated, Chief," Sarah snapped. "Eli has the coordinates. The Big Pine, on the ridge. They are at the Big Pine now. They are killing a child, now." There was a pause, then, "I've got a TAC team airborne from Peterson AFB. They were on a training op. They're 15 minutes out, Sarah. Can you hold on?" "We can't," she whispered. "Just hurry." Gantry's finger tightened on the trigger. He was not a monster. He was a professional. This was just the last unpleasant bit of paperwork. A blur of black, tan, and crimson erupted from the darkness. It launched from the trees not with a bark, but with a low, wet, furious roar. Max, running on 3 legs and pure, unadulterated adrenaline, hit Gantry high on the chest. The force, even from the wounded dog, was enough to send the 250-pound man staggering backward. The gun fired, a deafening crack, the bullet ripping harmlessly into the storm-filled sky. Max did not go for the arm. He did not go for the leg. He went for the threat. He lunged for Gantry's gun hand, his jaws, trained for this exact moment, clamping down with the last of his strength. It was a battle of titans. Gantry roared, a sound of pure, surprised rage, slamming his free fist into Max's bleeding shoulder. The dog screamed, a high-pitched sound of agony, but his jaws did not unlock. He was a canine, he was Zeus, and this was his mission. "Get off me, you damned mutt!" Gantry bellowed, raising the dog and slamming him against the trunk of the Big Pine. Max's grip finally broke, and he fell, a broken heap, into the snow. Gantry, his hand bloody, his face a mask of fury, raised his revolver and aimed it at the dog's head. "Stupid animal," he spat. A sound cut through the wind, not a gunshot, a sound that did not belong, a deep rhythmic thwomp, thwomp, thwomp. Alston, bleeding in the snow, looked up. Gantry froze, confused. A light, brighter than God, punched through the blizzard, turning their dark, chaotic clearing into a stage. It was a searchlight, beaming down from the belly of a Pavehawk helicopter hovering just above the treetops. "This is the FBI!" A voice boomed from a loudspeaker, amplified 1,000 times. "Drop your weapon! Hands on your head! You are on video!" Gantry stood frozen in the spotlight, a perfect tableau of his crim, his gun aimed at the wounded dog, the unconscious child in the tree hollow, the bleeding, broken deputy in the snow. He was caught. His cold, professional calm shattered, and he did the only thing he could. His hands slowly went up. Alston, sobbing, was already crawling on his knees, his hands in the air. "He made me do it!" he screamed at the sky. "Thorne! It was all Thorne! He killed Eli! He was gonna kill the kid!" Snowmobiles, a swarm of them, crested the ridge, their headlights cutting through the trees. The first to stop was the TAC team, in white gear, their weapons trained on Gantry, but the second snowmobile was not a TAC unit. It skidded to a halt, and Sarah Jenkins jumped off the back. She had brought them. The front of the machine was driven by an FBI agent, and clinging to him, wrapped in a tactical jacket, was Eli. He was pale, in agony, but he was here. He fell off the machine before it even stopped, crawling, dragging himself through the snow toward the tree. "Noah! Noah!" Medics were already swarming the hollow, pulling the small, limp form out. "He's hypothermic, but he's breathing. We have a pulse." Eli reached the medics just as they were wrapping Noah in a thermal blanket. "Daddy," Noah whispered, his eyes fluttering open, his small, blue-tinged hand reaching out. Daddy, I I was a good shadow. Eli couldn't speak. He just collapsed over his son, his body shaking with sobs, pulling him into his arms. You were the best, Eli cried, his tears hot on his son's frozen cheek. You were the best. Across the clearing, Sarah ran, sliding to her knees in the blood-stained snow beside her dog. Zeus, she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. Hang on, boy. Hang on. Max, his duty complete, his pack safe, looked up at her. He let out one low whine and licked her hand. A medic ran up. Ma'am, let me... He's a canine officer, Sarah said, her voice full of steel and love. You save him. That's an order. Sometimes, God doesn't stop the storm. Instead, he sends quiet miracles to see us through it. In this story, the miracle wasn't thunder from the heavens. It was the unshakable loyalty of a canine named Max, who crawled through hell for the ones he loved. It was Sarah, a quiet guardian, placed by God exactly where she was needed, right when she was needed most. In our own lives, we all face storms, betrayal, fear, or loneliness. This story reminds us that even in the coldest, darkest night, you are never truly alone. God has a plan. He may not calm the storm, but he will always send a Max or a Sarah to walk through it with you. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Someone you know might be facing their own blizzard and needs to be reminded that miracles are real. Comment Amen below if you believe in the power of loyalty and divine protection. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us how faith finds a way, even in the darkest times. May God bless you, your families, and all those you love. May he always send a guardian to find you when you need them most.